Hey, this is a video for 2.7, Ecological Succession. So go ahead and check out the overview and set up your guided notes. Remember from previous courses that ecological succession, there are two types. We have primary and secondary succession. With primary succession, it is the gradual change in an ecosystem where there was no existing soil. So for example, after a lava flow or a glacial retreat, and you will have mosses and lichens appear first, then you will have grasses, eventually some small shrubs, and then more towards an evergreen forest, and then back to or up to a hardwood forest. And this is based on the biome. Okay, now you're going to see some of these pioneer species. These are some mosses over here on the left. This is what lichens are. Remember, that is a symbiotic relationship. And you'll find lichens on trees and rocks. You will also find these mosses over here. Now, what is happening is these pioneer species are actually like breaking the rock apart. And it is this freeze-thaw cycle that is cracking up the rock, and that is helping it to form soil. And then eventually, when you have the grasses growing, layer, more organic material, you're going to have thicker soil able to support taller plants with more intricate root structures. This is an example of a former lava field. This was from a trip to Hawaii that I made. And you'll see that this is actually from, I think it was 1867. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's the time. But that's all that is actually grown. So in here, there might have been a tree seed that like fell in there. And in Hawaii, a lot of the plants are adapted to like go in there, and you might see some random trees in there. But there were some small grasses also in here. This is more of a close-up or another area where you've seen, this is closer to the ocean, and you will see a lot more organisms or a lot more plants growing here. Now, this is all about competition for the sun. So when you have these grasses or these early successional species, they're going to be highly competitive, but they're highly competitive amongst each other, and the ones that are shade intolerant are going to be able to survive. Now, the biomass is not all that great for grass, but when you adding in some shrubs now, eventually these are also early successional, but shrubs are going to be taller than the grasses, and they will outcompete the grasses. So eventually the shrubs will take over. And then you will also have middle successional species, and that is organisms that they can tolerate the sun, but they also might be slightly shade tolerant as well. And then you're going to have late succession. So late succession, you're going to start seeing spruce trees. Spruce are a type of evergreen tree. And then eventually you may see maple trees. Now, this is not completed, but eventually the maple trees may outcompete the spruce trees. Or if this is not a broadleaf forest, you may see spruce trees may be the dominant species in this ecosystem. But again, this is based on the biome. The temperature and the rainfall is going to indicate that. Now, secondary succession is when you have already existing soil, and it is always going to be after a natural disaster. I mean, a natural disaster or something that humans do. So for example, you have fire, flood, earthquake, tsunami. Now, you're going to have the grasses appear, the shrubs, the evergreen forest, and then the hardwood forest. Now, you're not going to, after secondary succession or even with primary succession, it is again according to that biome. If you started with grasses and you have a fire, you're not just all of a sudden going to have a forest. It's going to return. The late successional species will be these grasses that were originally present. In areas of California where they're experiencing wildfires, if it's the chaparral, that's going to be shrubland. So you're not going to see a lot. You're not going to have trees again growing there either. Okay, now we're going to switch gear and talk about keystone species. Keystone species are species that has a large impact on an ecosystem relative to its population. It's called that because in an arch, the keystone is this stone that is at the top, and if you remove it, the entire integrity of the arch will topple. And there are predators that serve as keystone species. One of them is a sea otter. The sea otter eats sea urchins, and sea urchins are damaging to the kelp forests off the coast of the United States. And another example is the pisaster sea star, and these organisms also eat urchins and other organisms in the Pacific Northwest. So these are two examples of keystone species. Again, they feed on their top predators usually, but they feed on organisms that may have high reproductive rates, and they feed on organisms that may be damaging to others in the ecosystem. And we also have ecosystem engineers. One example of an ecosystem engineer is the wolf, the gray wolf. Gray wolves were introduced or reintroduced to Yellowstone Park, and gray wolves impacted the deer populations, and that also impacted the way that the deer fed, and it impacted a lot of the plant species that were common and that were present in parts of Yellowstone Park. Another one is a beaver, and beavers will gnaw down trees with their teeth, and they will build a dam to block a river, so they can also engineer an ecosystem. Huge impacts for their relatively small population size. Okay, indicator species are species whose population or abundance can indicate the environmental conditions. One example is lichen. Lichen can indicate the quality of the air. Macroinvertebrates, this is an example. Macro just means large. This is a dragonfly nymph. It is a juvenile dragonfly. They live in fresh water, and they will not live in areas that are very highly polluted. So if you have other organisms in these aquatic ecosystems, they might indicate some organisms can tolerate pollution, some cannot tolerate pollution. This one tells you that the water is relatively clean. Peppered moth is an indicator species. If you see a high color of dark peppered moths, it could indicate that tree bark may be polluted. Amphibians, especially salamanders and frogs, they absorb a lot of moisture through their skin. Their skin needs to be moist. So if there are toxins in the environment, they will readily take it up into their bodies, and they cannot live in toxic environments. If you see frogs living in polluted waterways, frogs may have multiple limbs, might have three, like an extra leg. If you Google it, you could see some images. Cyanobacteria. Now, this can indicate water quality. This can indicate poor water quality. This can indicate eutrophication has occurred. So cyanobacteria gives water this green color. What I would like you to do is respond to this check for understanding by completing practice problem set 2.7. I hope that this video is informative. I thank you for your attention, and I'll see you soon.